Welcome to the University of Alabama. One of the four buildings that survived the Civil War is to the left.
At Alabama, tradition is a mantra. Dotted with shrines to past glories, it was once the singular birthplace of the state's leadership class. Especially perhaps for politicians. Of student government here, journalist Marshall Frady writes, "If the Battle of Waterloo was won on the fields of Eton, then many a governor or senator has been born in the dorms and sidewalks of Tuscaloosa." Yet all but a few have owed their success in part to a tradition of membership in a powerful, secret, all-white political machine. Now, in the light of a new day, the university grapples with that tradition and its own heritage to balance political principle and practicality, present with past. What's happening inside this stadium on a September Saturday is the center of statewide interest.
There you go, sir. Y'all enjoy the game.
To the two women outside campaigning for student body president, most fans are oblivious. Perhaps they shouldn't be. Because the list of student government candidates over the years reads like a who's who of Alabama politics. The most contemporary names, Lieutenant Governor Don Siegelman and Senator Richard Shelby. In the recent past, Senator Howell Heflin, and the 1986 gubernatorial rivals Bill Baxley and Charlie Graddick, and earlier Senators Lister Hill and John Sparkman, Congressman Carl Elliott, Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, and the consummate Alabama politician George C. Wallace. Like most of their predecessors, these candidates are bright, ambitious, and politically active. Dothan's Jessica Medeiros has headed the recent Student Constitutional Convention and has interned in the State Attorney General's office. Erin Tinbrunsel from Huntsville has been active in organizations concerned with women, African American, and international students. But it's the first time in history that both major candidates have been women. And it's the first election since an unprecedented suspension of SGA climaxed growing tensions and an age-old rivalry that remains at the heart of this campaign. Tinbrunsel is supported primarily by independents. Medeiros has the backing of most fraternities and sororities. Although the Greek system accounts for only about 20% of the student population, it has from its start dominated campus politics, having lost only 7 elections in 80 years. The source of that power, in part, is a political coalition of 24 or so prominent all-white fraternities and sororities, usually referred to simply as the Machine, but with links to a 125-year-old secret society whose Greek letters, Theta Nu Epsilon, spell one. The Machine and its purported abuses, long a topic of campus interest, have lately caught the attention of national magazines and tabloid television.
A secret society that is powerful and some say ruthless. It is called the Machine.
Of particular interest, the alleged 1993 assault of an anti-machine candidate which prompted the disbanding. But the divisions of today are older even than student government, as old, in fact, as the university itself. At the start, the college was, for all practical purposes, a finishing school for the sons of planters. But while nearly all were wealthy, some were not far removed from the frontier. In 1834, President Alva Woods was chased across campus by a band of students throwing brickbats and firing pistols. Fraternities provided more constructive relief from what was, in fairness, an austere environment. Student societies began in the school's first month. The first national social fraternity, Delta Kappa Epsilon, appeared in 1847, and by the start of the Civil War, there were 5. Always viewed by some as snobbish, Greeks were technically banned here in the 1870s, but survived to flourish after the turn of the century, when following the admission of women, they were joined by sororities. Theta Nu Epsilon made elitism a virtue. With the help of Skull and Bones at Yale, the group was established in 1870, came to Alabama in 1888, and never left. Not a social fraternity, but a secret society, T&E handpicks the most well-heeled among Greek sophomore men and reveals to them the carefully guarded secrets which are said to prepare them for a noble way of life and a lifetime membership in the leadership class. T&E ideals and projects were high-minded, but the group was also interested in unifying Greeks, and it played a strong role in the national movement for student self-government, sweeping campuses just before World War I. That combination would be a potent recipe for political power. One of the first to follow it was a young Deke from Montgomery. He had the pedigree that would have made him a plum for Theta Nu Epsilon. And in 1914, when the new SGA Constitution replaced the Civil War vintage military system, Lister Hill became its first president. While his support for the involvement of women foreshadowed a long career as one of the state's most distinguished progressives, he is also assumed by many to be the father of the machine. In the early days, T&E members were like most students, wealthy, white Protestant men. The population today is more diverse, and especially in light of the university's history, the issue of inclusiveness is a primary and sensitive one.
Because this is a southern university, and a lot of people in this university have lost sight of that.
But it's also still a conservative campus where history is never far removed. The antebellum mansions and Old South heritage associated with the Greek system cannot avoid being symbols for many of the plantation, and that they remain segregated seen as a confirmation. Such symbols are hard to resist in the race for executive vice president. South Carolina senior Brad Elliott has been an employee and a friend of the man who is credited with shutting down SGA. Vice President Harry Knopke has also been the focus of resentment in portions of the Greek community for his efforts to regulate it and for his frank opposition to segregation.
Robert E. Lee being a spiritual founding father, I guess having him in the house is what we feel sets us apart from other fraternities and what we were founded on and what we believe in.
But Elliott is also president of Kappa Alpha, one of the oldest and most prestigious fraternities on campus, known for its deep Old South roots and perennial membership in the machine. His opponent is Alan Bivens, a Tuscaloosa native and a second-generation African-American campus leader.
Every student can have a voice now, and that's what we want this SJ to be. We want it to be fair, we want it to be open.
If inclusion is the key issue in this campaign, it is not a new one. The history of the SGA here is, to an extent, a story of how it and the machine have responded to ever-increasing diversity. Often that response has been predictable. Sometimes it has not. (1935). The university was in the midst of the Depression, and George Denny, trying to keep it afloat, was pitching the school as a bargain for out-of-staters. The result was an influx of Northerners with a variety of religious and ethnic backgrounds. The first to seize this as a political opportunity was a gangly North Alabama farm boy bound for a career in Congress. Carl Elliott gambled by targeting independent Northerners and women who, like himself, he said, were social outcasts.
But it worked. And when at that time I got the most votes, I think this is true, for president of the student body that any president had.
By most accounts, it was the first defeat ever for the machine, and the last for 30 years. 2 years later, another student of humble origins hit campus campaigning and had the freshman class presidency sewn up before the machine knew he was here. But George Wallace had gotten their attention. His 2 successive campaigns to head the prestigious entertainment program, the Cotillion Club, failed. Of only 3 election losses this master politician would suffer in his entire career, 2 would be at the hands of the machine. World War II brought a temporary but dramatic change in the student population, shifting it from 63% male to 70% female. But SGA remained a men's club. In 1944, for the first time, the sororities challenged it. For vice president, Kappa Delta secured a machine endorsement for a political science student who would one day join the White House staff. And when the SGA president later resigned, Libby Anderson became the first woman to preside over the student body. Despite her machine backing, Anderson initiated a series of reforms aimed at broadening participation. Her most lasting legacy is the creation of the Student Senate.
I felt badly that the sororities and fraternities seemed to control the whole scene and wanted to bring the independents into the political role and spread enthusiasm for self-government over the campus and get more students involved.
But significant political gains for women were short-lived. Anderson's feat would not be matched for 3 generations. 1956 and the first abortive attempt at racial desegregation set the tone on campus for an era of turbulence and change, and its impact crossed Greek, independent, and machine lines.
We called ourselves the group, not the machine. We never used the term machine.
Julian Butler came to the university in 1957, pledged KA, and was soon approached to join the group.
I don't remember really more than usually 2 meetings a year. They were usually held late at night. They were held in a variety of places, from fraternity house basement to above a hardware store to out in a field beside a highway.
2 years later, when Butler ran unopposed for SGA president, the group was at its peak. Like Theta Nu Epsilon, with which it was now somewhat vaguely connected, the machine was overwhelmingly Greek, all male, and like the school, all white. But the year was 1960. If the most politically active students were often machine Greeks, most were also Democrats with New Deal roots. Some campaigned for Kennedy and were forced to confront the issue of race for the first time. Butler, who later worked for Hill, Elliott, and other progressives, found it stimulating.
It was a very eye-opening experience for me and broadened certainly my views and made me think about issues that I probably had never thought about before.
I wanted to do something about trying to make Alabama a better state for race relations and civil rights.
Though head of a machine fraternity, Butler's friend Bill Baxley denies group membership, but he does remember sharing Butler's attitudes. As president of the Cotillion Club in 1962, Baxley made a point of booking the first black entertainers since the start of the civil rights era.
That was kind of exciting. We got threats and things. Felt like a, pioneer.
As State Attorney General, Bill Baxley was consistent, aggressively prosecuting civil rights crimes, including the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. In 1986, he and campaign manager Julian Butler were also at the center of a gubernatorial campaign brought down by the issue of backroom politics. As the decade intensified, national issues overshadowed the more typical mundane concerns of college life, even for the most apathetic students.
I don't think there's any question that during the entire decade of the 1960s that the college students' values at the University of Alabama underwent a dramatic change.
I think we would both been viewed as having fairly radical politics at the time.
The election of 1966 pitted against one another 2 friends who would later become law partners specializing in civil rights and civil liberties. In a campaign that split the machine, independent Jack Drake also had the support of a Greek splinter group. Ralph Knowles, a former Sigma Chi, was backed by mainline machine houses and by independents as well.
But I think overriding it all was the sort of intense, the intensity of what was going on politically and ideologically in the state. You couldn't avoid it.
Knowles didn't try. When elected, he plunged the SGA fully into the political fray, particularly on the issue of race. A founder of the Emphasis Speaker program, he brought to campus controversial figures and spirited debate. He appointed the first black student legislator, and he was the only leader of a white organization in Alabama to openly denounce Governor Wallace's resistance to K-12 public school desegregation.
We really dealt with issues and tried to deal with them straight up. I think, looking back on it, that is something that It certainly wasn't me. It was, that all of us could be proud of.
By the 1970s, political institutions were under fire from all directions, and SGA was no longer in tune with the politics of the street. Its officers and representatives were still nearly all white and male. Meanwhile, blacks were becoming increasingly numerous and politically active. So were women, including those in sororities, who were still expected to support machine candidates while not running for office themselves. In 1976, those two groups formed a seemingly unlikely alliance with dramatic results.
I went to the University of Alabama in order to be SGA president. I mean, it was why I went to the University of Alabama.
Cleo Thomas had personal charm, political experience, and a wide range of contacts, including many in the Greek system.
We saw it as a chance to elect a very good, qualified candidate, but also to perhaps overcome some of Alabama's racial past.
Kappa Kappa Gamma became something of a stronghold. For a number of women there, including friend and campaign manager Jeanette Coleman, support for Thomas was in part a declaration of independence.
I think women were beginning to see that their voice could be heard and would be heard in politics also.
While the Thomas campaign brought together a remarkably diverse group of supporters, it was not without its awkward moments.
So as I got ready to go to one particular sorority house, I was told that they had to call their national headquarters to see if I could come to dinner.
The alliance, no matter how unlikely, was effective. Thomas won. 20 years later, he would sit on the university's board of trustees. Although no other African Americans would succeed him as SGA president, a door had been opened, and women would never again be taken for granted. While Theta Nu Epsilon would remain all male, the machine would not. But the change did not come without resentment. On the night of Thomas's election, 15 men in white sheets from the Kappa Sigma house burned an 8-foot cross on the Kappa Kappa Gamma lawn. Unfortunately, it marked the beginning of an era of particularly mean-spirited campaigns, which seemed to mark a shift in the nature and tactics of the machine.
If you have a secret organization that's run by a small, non-inclusive group, I think it can take on different personalities given the people involved at the time and given the circumstances.
A series of campaign-related incidents began in 1983 when independent John Bolus became the next to successfully challenge the machine by making its existence an issue. But shortly after, his roommate discovered that the phone had been tapped.
And when he traced it, the wiring ran along a fence about 100 yards, maybe not quite that much, down to an alley. And at the end was a jack that would plug into a tape recorder.
An FBI investigation resulted in 2 arrests. In 1985, another independent, John Merrill, had been backed by the machine and elected SGA vice president. The next year, he ran against the group for president and also won. But in the course of the campaign, he interrupted an SGA senator staging a Watergate-style break-in of his SGA office and called the campus newspaper.
And they came down to the office and they brought a camera and they started asking him questions and they took his picture and he commences to telling all what they were trying to do and why they were trying to do it. It was unbelievable that it happened the way that it did.
By 1989, with losses to independents becoming more frequent and the Greek population in decline, the machine was forced to fully admit the increasingly assertive sororities. It endorsed Lynn Yeldell against popular independent Joy Viselli. Yeldell became SGA's first elected woman president, but in a close campaign in which more than a dozen election observers filed reports concerning alleged voting fraud. The results were upheld, but students were never again allowed to manage the election process. Because of Viselli's spirited protest, his parents were reportedly subjected to threats, and a Greek system boycott was partly responsible for the bankruptcy of the family pizza business. In the ill-fated election of 1993, it was a citizen of Sorority Row who defected. Minda Riley was a member of a machine house, but when she was denied its endorsement and ran anyway, Riley violated the group's cardinal rule. After Thanksgiving break, she found remains of a burned cross on her lawn and written warnings on behalf of the machine. The following January 31st, she reported being beaten by a masked intruder who told her in profane terms that she had crossed the wrong people.
He had like pantyhose over his face, and he hit me a couple of times in the face and blacked my eye, busted my lip. Nobody deserves what I've been through. Nobody.
2 days later, the university announced the suspension of the election and the SGA. No suspect was ever prosecuted, and some SGA officials, present and past, thought the administration action was partisan and authoritarian. Dr. Knopke insisted that the history of intimidation and the growing doubts about the integrity of the process required it.
An assault in her house was the last straw. Once that happened, it became clear that we had to do something. We just couldn't go along with an election and let that kind of behavior pass.
2 years later, after a series of reforms in the student constitution and the election process, the campaign for a new SGA blasted off, carrying 80 years of old baggage. The magic words were inclusiveness and diversity, and everyone knew their lines.
I've learned to make student government work with many different kinds of people with all different opinions and ideas.
One thing I would like to see is a committee, a presidential committee on diversity formed.
This new SGA is about bringing students together, and I'm excited about that.
Look around you. Look at the diversity around us. We have people from all different backgrounds. That's what the SGA is all about.
But between the lines lay the same old suspicions over Greek membership, class, and race.
By being a Greek, how have you went and tried to channel bridges to other groups that are actually here on campus?
And I've run a fair and honest campaign, and I'm a fair and honest person. But because KA is after my name, or Rumor Machine Kennedy, I'm a bad person, and I don't know where that comes from. You know?
As polling began, the practical political question would likely be whether an independent coalition would turn out enough votes to overcome the machine's presumed 20% guarantee.
The disappointment that I experienced that evening when we were looking at the results was in the number of non-Greek students who turned out to vote. The number wasn't that significant.
Can I have your attention, please? The Crimson White has just handed me a piece of paper with the official results. The following people have won with 59.12%. President of the SGA, Jessica.
Greeks took the top 2 offices and all other races in which they ran by a 3-2 margin. A quarter of all students voted. The Greek turnout was 81%. Among independents, 15%.
In the words of Reverend Jesse Jackson, all of us count and fit somewhere. We have proven that we can survive without each other, but we have not proven that we can progress without each other.
The new administration opened on a promising note, but played to mixed reviews on its efforts to broaden its own base.
It's their own personal choice, and there's not much you can do about it. I mean, you can publicize and publicize and publicize and beg and beg and beg, but that's all you can do.
Many agree that Greeks have dominated because they are often the ones who are more active, ambitious, and politically astute.
The machine succeeds and only because the majority of the people that vote for its candidates. Now, how anybody can argue with that is beyond me.
Others counter that no other organization can match the ability of the mainstream Greek system to develop or elect candidates, and that outsiders see SGA as a private club.
We agreed to what the general rules of the game are. I think the question is if there are insurmountable institutional barriers to anybody ever entering the mix and entering the game. And I think with the machine, it very well may be that they are.
The underlying yet overshadowing issue remains that of segregation. There are black fraternities and sororities too, but while they have had white members, the color barrier among white Greeks has never been broken. It is true that Greeks, like independents, black and white alike, tend to segregate themselves. And there are serious concerns over civil liberties issues in any attempt to force desegregation. But there are also deep cultural taboos based on race at the heart of much of the resistance in Greek houses.
They also play a part in marriage patterns. That's one of the great barriers preventing the integration of these organizations, is the fact that interracial marriage and interracial dating is still such a highly discouraged activity.
This is, of course, a highly volatile issue to which the university's funding sources, alumni and legislators alike, are particularly sensitive. But there are those, including Greeks, past and present, who think the university has a higher calling.
I don't know that there will be an easy solution, but I think that it could strengthen the Greek system to be more inclusive.
The idea that you have a system that encompasses a significant portion of the University of Alabama campus that excludes anybody on the basis of race or religion or whatever is repugnant to anything that I believe.
It's appalling, really, when you think about it.
Okay, to the right is what we call the quad.
The struggle for change is itself a tradition. The culture and politics of the campus have always mirrored its population. Now, as that population becomes more and more diverse, it also increasingly mirrors the culture, politics, and conflicts of the society at large. Change has often been difficult here. The tradition continues.
For a videotape of this program, send a check or money order for $21 to the University of Alabama, P.O. Box 87,000, Tuscaloosa, Alabama 35487. Or use your Visa, Discover, or MasterCard by calling 1-800-463-8825.